Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vietor.
All right, let's get to the news. Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan is moving. House Democrats introduced their version of the plan on Friday and hope to pass it by the end of this week. It includes all the president's priorities: $1,400 checks, a $400 per week expansion of unemployment insurance, money to speed up vaccinations, open schools safely, save state and local jobs like teachers and first responders, and an increase in the federal minimum wage to $15 per hour. In the spirit of bipartisanship and compromise, House Republican leaders responded by urging all of their members to vote no on what they're calling the Payoff to Progressives Act. Cool. Love it. First, the Republicans tried complaining that the bill wasn't unifying and bipartisan. Then they tried to pretend that they care about the deficit again, said it was too expensive. Now they're calling it Payoff to Progressives. The plan is still one of the most popular pieces of legislation in years, maybe decades. 70% of Americans support it. Why do you think the usually very effective Republican propaganda machine has yet to dent the support for the bill?
So it is extremely popular. Our poll with Change found that it has 69% support, nice, but also 39% support among Republicans. You know, you mentioned 70%. That's what the Times found today. It's gone up over the last months. It went from 59% to over 70% in the Times poll. There was a write-up in the poll, and I thought there was a paragraph that I thought was understated about their challenge here, right? Republican pushback is complicated by the pandemic's ongoing economic pain, with millions of Americans still out of work and the recovery slowing. It is also hampered by the fact that many of the lawmakers objecting to Mr. Biden's proposals supported similar provisions, including direct checks to individuals while Mr. Trump was president. So there's still a huge economic crisis. Though it's popular, and they all supported this stuff before. So I think they've tried a couple of things. I think what is striking about going to this progressive bailout language is it doesn't feel like it's an argument for the country at all. It feels like now they're just talking to their own members and trying to keep as many defections down because they've clearly lost the public relations fight on the actual bill itself. So I think they're just trying to make this as painful as possible for any Republicans, especially in the House, that might bail and join with Democrats to vote for it.
Yeah, and Tommy, I mean, there may be a few defections because, like, isn't it at this point, like, politically stupid for Republicans to oppose this bill? So much of the discussion over the last few weeks has been Biden and Biden's need and the Democrats' need to find Republicans or else it's politically damaging for them. But, like, how politically wise is it to oppose a bill that 70% of people support?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm a statewide elected official or in a moderate district, I would want to be for this. I think it's the answer to your question, is it politically stupid to oppose this bill? I think unequivocally, yes. It doesn't mean that the bill is going to be, the number one issue in the midterms in 2022 or some like silver bullet politically for Biden. But I'm very confident that everyone in the country wants the pandemic gone. Everybody. They want to get vaccinated. They want schools open. They want economic relief if they're out of work. Like, this is basic stuff. And like Lovett was saying, I mean, the arguments against the bill are either whining about unity, whining about the bill being too big, or now they boil down to some sort of version of this money is going to liberals and liberal states and you hate liberals more than you want help. And it's not working, right? I mean, 75% of independents like the bill, 40% of Republicans support the bill in the New York Times poll. I would want to find a way to be for this. And I think, Republicans are really showing their colors here after all this crying about unity if they're whipping against the bill, calling it like a progressive bailout or a blue state bailout, right? It's like very shallow stuff.
There's also been a lot of parallels to 2009 and the Recovery Act over the last several weeks. The big difference here is in 2009, we were staring into a very uncertain future, and that even if the Recovery Act passed, we had no idea where the bottom was in the economic crisis and when the economy would fully recover. The difference now is, now that we have the vaccines and economic projections are looking so far, fingers crossed, like quite good for the end of the year and into next year. And so if Republicans want to be against a bill that passes soon, after and we're all sitting here in late 2021 or 2022 and the pandemic is much more under control and the economy is back, it does seem like it is a much bigger risk than being against the Recovery Act in 2009.
Yeah, I'd also just say too, even if you are so generous beyond reason on this progressive bailout soundbite and say, well, what do they mean? And they mean they're against state and local aid because they believe some of it will go to cover budget shortfalls for blue states that had problems before the pandemic. The issue of state and local aid is still popular. It's not like you pull off one of these issues that they're trying to drive home and you find something where there's some weak underbelly of the bill. Up and down, the major pieces of the bill are popular from top to bottom.
Oh, I mean, also, Florida's going to get a check. Texas is going to get a check. They're all going to get the check. They're all going to get like their state and local government money. Yeah, they're going to get their checks. They're going to get their unemployment insurance. They're going to get their state and local government funding. All the red states get it. All the people who voted for Trump get it too. It's fucking absurd. So with most Republicans opposed and Congress this closely divided, just about every Democrat has to support the plan for it to pass. One place where that might be a problem is the $15 minimum wage increase. The LA Times reports that Senator Joe Manchin said he wants a smaller increase, such as $11. And Senator Kyrsten Sinema said she doesn't believe the minimum wage is appropriate to pass through the 51-vote threshold budget reconciliation process. Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders disagrees and said that he's, quote, confident that the Senate parliamentarian will advise next week that we can raise the minimum wage through the reconciliation process. Tommy, how do you think that Biden should be handling this issue? Because he has now said both that he doesn't think the parliamentarian will rule in our favor on a minimum wage and that he's willing to compromise on the size of the increase.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like he's trying to do a little bit of expectation setting when it comes to the minimum wage piece of this. And as you said, he's got two problems. The first is this procedural matter where this random parliamentarian gets to decide if the minimum wage can pass as part of the reconciliation process because, he will decide whether it impacts the budget. And then the second piece is getting votes from Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema because Manchin thinks $15 is too much and Sinema thinks it's inappropriate to pass in reconciliation. I think if I were Biden, I would do a little bit less talking out loud about expectations or how the parliamentarian may or may not score it. I would focus on why it's important to get done, why people desperately need an increase in the minimum wage, why the minimum wage is not a living wage in most states. I mean, there's a bigger message you could make about how it's ludicrous that the US Senate is so broken that this random parliamentarian gets to make a decision this big. The good news is that Bernie Sanders is confident that it can be part of reconciliation. He's made the point that opening up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for oil and gas exploration was part of a reconciliation package. And this clearly has a bigger impact on the budget than that did. So, but I would just, in terms of messaging, I would just focus on the need and why, this is long overdue, frankly.
Yeah, Lovett, I kind of think, I agree with Tommy on this, that he should be sort of get caught fighting for this. And if Manchin and Sinema want to be the ones to sink it, or potentially other Democratic senators, then make sure people know that they're the ones sinking it, not you, the president, who is the one who put it in your package in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, so there's three things. So Manchin has a policy. It seems little to do with the parliamentarian. He has a policy opposition to going to 15, right? And it seems like there's some negotiation there. Sinema has two objections, right? One of them is around. She has said she doesn't want to go against the parliamentarian, and then she has another objection, which is she doesn't know that it's totally germane to this and shouldn't be, because it's not in the spirit of unity, a good idea to include it when it's not part of COVID.
Right,
Neither
right.
of which. Now, the parliamentarian piece, I think, is she's been definitive about in the sense of saying, I won't basically undo the filibuster for any of this to get this in if the parliamentarian objects. She has not been as definitive on whether she would vote against the package, and I find it hard to believe she would oppose a minimum wage increase she would support, but for the fact that it's in the wrong bill, I think that's strange. So regardless,
I agree.
I think some of the expectation setting though might be if you look at where this is heading, Bernie is extremely bullish on it getting into the package. Manchin seems like he would fight to get it to be a lower number. I think if Biden is basically setting the expectation on, I'm not sure we can get any minimum wage done, and then they land at somewhere between where we are now, which is 725 and 15. I do think it's important to be able to declare raising the minimum wage for the first time in so many years of victory, even if Joe Manchin gets it lowered. So I agree on the thinking out loud, but a little little bit of like, hey, if we get to a minimum wage increase, which was incredibly difficult under these circumstances, there'll be a lot of people angry that it's not 15. But at the same time, it would have been a Herculean achievement under the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, it seems very clear that the chances of us getting a $15 minimum wage increase right now are very low because Joe Manchin has been very clear that he doesn't want it at 15 and we need his vote or we don't get it. So the question, so then if you're Biden or the Biden administration and Schumer and everyone else, you go to Manchin and say, okay, if it's ruled that it can be part of reconciliation, what does it take to get you to yes? Do we delay the increase longer? Do we make it, a lower federal minimum wage in some states like Virginia where the cost of living is lower than in California and New York where $15 doesn't get you as much as it does in maybe West Virginia? So like you got to figure out if there's room for compromise. But I do think at this point it's hard to see a $15 minimum wage passing as is if Manchin is so opposed. One place where Manchin is definitely causing problems for the Democrats is with Neera Tanden. The senator said he's opposing her nomination for director of the Office of Management and Budget because she sent some mean tweets, which he said would have a, quote, toxic and detrimental impact on her relationship with Congress. He framed his decision as a, quote, meaningful step to end the political division and dysfunction that pervades our politics. This morning, Senators Collins and Romney also came out against Neera's nomination, leaving her without many options for the 50 votes she needs. Mean tweets, guys. Tommy, why do you think Manchin did this, and what happens now?
It's completely ludicrous. I mean, just one note on people who want to impact Joe Manchin's vote on the minimum wage. Reverend William Barber, his Poor People's Campaign, has been organizing rallies in West Virginia with folks who would benefit from a minimum wage increase. So that's one way to like actually impact politics in West Virginia. Why Joe Manchin has drawn the line on mean tweets, I don't know. I'm like, maybe I'm just being, this cuts close to home as a guy who sends mean tweets, but I believe in freedom of speech. I believe that there's a lot to criticize in Washington. Like if he has a substantive critique of Neera's qualifications or her policy views or her work at the Center for American Progress, that would be one thing. That's a conversation that they could have. But I mean, you have members of Congress who are vicious and dishonest and cruel and do cruel things all day long and prioritize their own political futures over a good policy. And what this vote to me says is you can't criticize us or you can't advance in Washington. And I think that is total bullshit. I think that like the message this sends to anyone who wants to climb the ranks in DC is shut up and, never, color outside the lines or speak honestly. I mean, I think it's a terrible, terrible precedent.
Yeah, you won't see any of us at a confirmation hearing in Washington for a number of reasons. Nope. But one of them is definitely because of the mean tweets that we've sent.
That's been that's been the hardest part of the past couple of days is just watching my own confirmation chances swirl down the drain. Yeah, I would also, Joe Manchin voted to confirm Jeff Sessions, who was denied a federal judgeship for being a fucking racist. Like this is
Rick Grinnell, fucking Rick Grinnell.
Twitter troll.
Like it's beyond absurd. It's ridiculous. Like criticize Neera Tanden on substantive grounds. Denying it over tweets is bullshit. I don't understand. I don't presume to understand Joe Manchin's motivations, what he's trying to project. Again, I say that as one of the biggest Joe Manchin fans in the world. And I don't ever want that to go unnoted. But there's a little bit of like, it's obviously very high stakes in terms of, the Biden administration not wanting to get pushed around. It's high stakes for Neera Tanden, but like clearly like people like Joe Manchin saying that Neera Tanden should not be confirmed, people like Hugh Hewitt writing that she should be confirmed. It's sort of like almost like a free chance to demonstrate some kind of bona fides in one direction or another when you know that ultimately like the ideological stakes are very low. Like we know the Biden general position that's going to come out of ONB. It's true whether or not it's Neera Tanden or some of the others that have been floated like Gene Sperling or and others. So, I do think it's really hypocritical and despicable that a Senate may not be able to confirm something, when the previous president was a monster tweeting like crazy all the time. And a lot of those no votes will come on the basis of tweets from the people who supported Donald Trump for years.
Who supported Donald Trump and pretended to never see those tweets. One of the things that really annoyed me most about this is Susan Collins saying that that Neera doesn't necessarily have the experience to run OMB. Of course, Neera Tanden has the experience to run OMB. She's had high-level positions in the government. She's run the Center for American Progress. Again, you can take issue with her positions on certain issues if you would like. That's completely fair. But the idea that she doesn't have the experience is fucking bullshit. But
it is the perfect cancel culture like anger story, right? Because the Republicans who go on TV all day and get really mad about cancel culture are almost never impacted by the actual event they're mad about, right? Like all the people on Fox News angry about and mocking the San Francisco school board don't live in San Francisco and don't send their kids to public school there, and thus will not be impacted by the names of said schools, but they want to find and seek out and highlight these issues to get people mad about them. And it's a ridiculous waste of time.
Yeah. I mean, long term here, I think, by the time we record this, it could be over, but I think, the White House said they're pushing ahead on Neera's nomination. I guess she could get Murkowski's vote. She needs one Republican vote now if Manchin's a no. So I guess you look at Murkowski. I don't know who you start looking at beyond that unless someone does something kind of wild. Like another Bill Cassidy moment, right? I don't know.
But by the way, actually totally plausible. Like, who knows? Again, it could be withdrawn by the time this is out. But I also, first of all, fight for the posters. Fight for the right to post. Honestly, we want people in government who grab a glass of Chardonnay at 11 p.m. and start arguing with people that have no pictures with their faces. We want that.
Fight for freedom of speech.
Damn right.
Are we for freedom of speech or not? It's so frustrating. Everyone is for freedom of speech until it hurts their feelings.
Yeah, and I will say that if Neera is pulled and we end up with Gene Sperling, that is another outstanding progressive to be in that role who's very experienced and long-term big picture for the future of the Biden administration, the Biden agenda, it will be okay, but it is fucking bullshit that it is coming.
Bullshit. Neera, fight for Neera. Hey, I want every red rose out there to fight for the right to post.
This is about shit posting. That's what this is.
First this isn't
about the federal
tweets.
Budget. This is about shit posting.
First they came for Neera Tanda's tweets, but I did not speak up, for I supported Bernie in the primaries.
If any speech should be acceptable in almost any circumstances, it's criticism of powerful elected officials. You know what I mean? It's any chilling of free speech of elected officials is a real problem. This is not getting mad. This isn't Tom Cotton going on Fox News being mad about the Muppets being edited, right? He's going to vote down someone who was critical of his colleagues because he's, pissy about it.
I'm just going to go on record as saying I am not standing up for the San Francisco school board, though. Some of that shit is crazy.
I mean, sure. I totally agree, but it's why is it national news? Because a bunch of Republicans sought it out because they wanted to lift it up and get people mad about it, right? That's why this whole conversation gets so exhausting.
You're totally right. They pick something that is annoying or sounds silly and they lift it up to put it on the same plane as much larger, more consequential debates. And it is fucking absurd. Right. All right, let's move on to the debate over reopening schools. Speaking of schools, President Biden said last week that his goal is to have grades K through 8 open 5 days a week by the end of April. Currently, an estimated 60% of students aren't attending in-person classes full time, either fully remote or hybrid. The Biden administration has been saying that passing the American Rescue Plan would help schools reopen safely by funding physical distancing, testing, contact tracing, and ventilation. Vaccinations would also help. The challenge there is that, as of now, educators are only on the priority list in 28 states. And as Dr. Fauci told me on Thursday's episode, the timeline for vaccinating children is probably sometime this fall. Republican strategists are looking to exploit parents' frustration, of course they are, by blaming school closures on Democrats and teachers' unions. One former House Republican official told the New York Times, quote, "School closures have radicalized suburban mothers for the last 6 months." Let's start, Tommy, with how much power and influence does the federal government have when it comes to reopening schools?
Very little. The federal government has very little authority when it comes to pushing for school reopenings. A lot of the control is local. What Biden can do is fight for his COVID relief package to get passed, because that has $130 billion in it that will be used to safeguard K through 12 schools. And it's also what the teachers unions are pointing to in saying, hey, this needs to happen to make these schools safe for everybody before we can go back in. Biden can also, his messaging can be powerful. They can use the bully pulpit to make the case for schools to reopen, to talk about why it's important. He can also, just handle COVID better than Trump did, right? That will make it safe to reopen schools at some point. But in terms of when it comes to forcing schools to be open, the president has very, very little power.
Yeah, I mean, Lovett. So the federal government, does offer guidelines on how to safely reopen schools through the CDC, which has recommended at least partial remote learning wherever there's high community transmission of the virus, a category which currently includes most of the country. So
Yeah.
it is tricky for the Biden administration here, and I sort of get, digging into this debate, you sort of get why there's been, the press calls it mixed messaging. I think it's more like some nuanced messages, partly because of the CDC guidelines. Like, Biden campaigned on a promise to follow the science on COVID. So if the science through the CDC is saying, well, if you're in a high transmission area, we wouldn't recommend you opening unless you can adhere to really strict guidelines, is there anything the Biden administration can really do to push schools to go faster than the CDC recommends?
So first of all, it's extremely complicated. It matters how old the kids are. And by the way, saying that 90% of schools shouldn't fully reopen is different than saying most schools should have some form of partial in school, partial at home, different for K through 8 than 9 through 12, different depending on the community transmission. So I think it's a really difficult issue. I will say, like, as I was just reading and prepping for this conversation, I found myself more and more angry about the last year and just the last year that we had, because I would say, like, first of all, there was just an absence of leadership, just words about words to express sympathy and support about the difficulty of this situation. The best what we got out of the past president was just like, schools must reopen, with no guidance, no leadership. Betsy DeVos was at her fucking lake house. So it was a despicable abdication of leadership that caused a lot of this. And then, there's been this effort, I think, on the part of some Republicans to make this about parents versus teachers unions. And I think there have been, teachers unions are also local, and there's been incredible variation in terms of what they've done, in terms of what they've called for. But the other piece of this is that it's for parents, for teachers, for everybody. Like, there's no great outcome here. The Times looked at what happened in Rhode Island when they reopened schools. Incredibly difficult. A lot of sacrifices. You look at places where schools aren't open, kids are falling behind and having mental health difficulties. Parents, especially moms, have had to stay home or give up jobs. It's a horrible issue. And so you see that in the polling, where it's like, should schools reopen safely? Of course people say yes. Are you worried about your kids going back to school? Of course they said yes. Are schools safe? Should schools reopen? Yes. Kind of reopen? Yes. Not reopen? Yes. Like, parents, everybody is all over the place because there's no great answer. But, like, giving money to help make sure schools can do testing, ventilation, making sure there's masking, making sure that you're setting up protocols so that kids can stay in groups, that, like, the way you divide children changes. I mean, this is what Raj Shah, who is head of USAID, and Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the AFT, the union, basically have written up what we need to do to get schools to reopen safely. It takes money. It takes incredibly sophisticated and thoughtful planning, and it just hasn't been there. And now we're almost in March. Even if you pass Biden's plan, when is that money going to be able to make a difference? So, like, I think they should try very hard to get teachers vaccinated, put these plans in place, do safe school reopenings. But in reality, I think we're still looking at trying to do as much as you can before the end of this year, but making sure schools are open in the fall. I think that's the reality.
I think what gets lost in this discussion is that almost everyone is in agreement that remote learning is bad and it doesn't work well. Like, I have several family members who are teachers, and they have described to me the process of teaching children remotely, and in some of these school districts, the hybrid learning where some kids go in and some are, and it is a disaster. It is hard to do. The students aren't developing well academically. They're not developing well emotionally. It's not easy for teachers to do these lessons. They don't like it. The parents obviously don't like it. The administrators don't like it. Like, everyone is in agreement that kids should be in school attending in-person classes. Of course, there are trade-offs and there are risks. And the reason it's not easy is because you can say both two things can be true: that remote learning is bad for children, and that there are risks to both children and teachers for being in schools when there is a deadly virus running around out there. So like it is a fraught, difficult issue. I do think that, Biden so far the messaging has been, we want schools to open, right? They want to be on the side of schools opening. And I think trying to say, we want to give schools and teachers and children every resource possible and available to make sure that the schools can open safely is sort of the best position to hold. Because, and again, it's not just a question of resources, though it certainly is. A lot of this comes down to trust and to feeling that your kids are going to be safe when they're in school. And if you're a teacher, that you're going to be safe when you go to school. And because the messaging has been so mixed, and because there's been such a lack of leadership from the Trump administration over the last year, it's going to take some real time to sort of rebuild that trust just around the messaging of what's safe and what's not.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just so many different equities here, right? I mean, like, teachers obviously want to feel safe in the classroom. Parents want their kids to go back to school, but they also don't want their kids coming home with the coronavirus and getting them sick. So like, everyone's got a different vantage point. There's a lot we could do right now to make schools safer, right? Universal masking. You group kids and teachers into stable groups that don't change, so that if one person gets the virus, only a limited number of people are exposed. Schools need better ventilation. That could be open windows. That can be HVAC units. And then you just need like lots and lots of testing, including asymptomatic testing for kids, for students, for teachers, to spot these outbreaks, right? So, but like, what I guess I don't totally understand is why teachers weren't a priority 1A when it came to vaccination in every states. I think something like 28 states, teachers can get vaccinated right now. But like, for example, here in LA County, teachers are in the 1B tier, which means starting in March, 10% of COVID vaccinations will go to teachers. But like, so the 1A was healthcare workers. But for example, I went to the dermatologist last week. Everyone in that office had been vaccinated. I'm glad they were. I agree they should have been vaccinated. But those aren't healthcare workers who were treating COVID patients and thus needed to get vaccinated, right? So if the priority was opening schools right away and making sure the environment was as safe as humanly possible, I would imagine you would just want to make vaccinations available to every teacher on day one, right? Like, sometimes this tiering that we do, I think, can get in the way of even our own priorities.
I totally agree with that, Tommy. I mean, I think for the states that do not have teachers on the priority list as of today, they should do it immediately. And I think the federal government, while Joe Biden and the federal government can't force the states to put teachers on the priority list right now, they can certainly talk about it a lot. They can use the bully pulpit. And they have, Kamala Harris said this last week. Joe Biden has said it. Dr. Fauci said it to me. Like, teachers should be a priority right now. If you are a teacher, you should be able to get a vaccine immediately. Now, where there has been some confusion is because Fauci and the CDC also said it's not a requirement for every single teacher to be vaccinated for schools to reopen. And what he said to me is basically, I think that's a question of demand too, right? Like, if there are some teachers who don't want the vaccine or don't get the vaccine, like, you can't hold out to open schools because some people, don't want to get it. But it should be available to every teacher, certainly.
We will look back on this period and we will find it abhorrent that we opened bars but not schools. We should have done everything in our power over the previous year to get the transmission rate low enough so that schools should have been first, not last. They should have been first. And as more and more evidence has come in, as we see that, like, kids can get it and they can transmit it, though not as much, and that as you get older, The Times has done great reporting on this. That the older the kids get, the more they look and transmit like adults. It's not perfect in places that have open schools. It's not gone very well in Rhode Island. It's not gone particularly well. You read about it. It's incredibly stressful for the teachers. Teachers and staff have gotten sick. Schools are open, then closed, and open again. That wreaks havoc on the parents trying to figure out their own work schedules. Like, there's no good options here. But Tommy pointed out to the 4 steps that like even the teachers unions have gotten behind, and it is incredible that we haven't been able as a country to rally enough resources to get those things done. Because one thing that they have found is the places that have done that have been able to take those steps, keep the kids apart, keep them masked, keep them in stable cohorts, do the testing, do the tracing, do the masking. It works. It works. It has kept the kids safe, and it has made it possible for them to get an education.
So the question is, like, how did Biden, we just had this conversation that, we all decided is a very nuanced, difficult debate, which is like a bullseye for Republican demagoguery. Any kind of nuanced, complicated discussion about a policy issue. So how did Biden and the Democrats and teachers union sort of handle the political challenge from Republicans on this issue? Because they are really amping up their criticism on this.
I'll say just one thing, which is there's this idea that, like, we shouldn't be cowed, like the idea that there's some radicalization going on, that like, there's, I don't see any of that in any polling. What I see in polling is that everyone understands this conflict, that there is there is a sense of that there are trade-offs here, that nobody has perfect answers. So my view on this is, like, just acknowledge the difficulty and set a, like, I think basically what Biden is saying, we want schools to be open. We want, to follow the science and make sure it's done safely. We want teachers to be vaccinated, and we want kids back in the classroom as soon as possible, for as much of the week as possible. And I think as long as they're reflecting the difficulty of the debate and the trade-offs and what parents are going through, kids are going through, teachers are going through, I think that's all you can do.
Tommy, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is if you want schools to reopen, then vote for the COVID relief bill. And if you refuse to do that, and if you refuse to give, the $100+ billion that schools need to retrofit and be safe, then you're not really serious here. I also do think, like, politically speaking, this may feel like an acute short-term issue, but if cases keep going down as they are, if we're all vaccinated by the end of the summer, I do think just handling COVID generally solves this school question, and you can manage the problem. But yeah, it is incredibly cynical.
No, it's what you said at the beginning, Tommy, which is like, it's just like when we would always say, Biden would always say during the campaign, best way to open the economy again is to fight the pandemic and to get the pandemic under control. It's also the best way to open schools again. If the CDC is saying that schools can open for in-person attendance where transmission rates are low, then get the transmission rates low, and the way to do that is to vaccinate everyone as fast as possible. Yeah, so this could be a problem that gets solved by the summer and fall. And I think that the messaging is. So far, the messaging is right. Like Sean Patrick Maloney, the House member who's running the DCCC this year, said, you're going to see in area after area the Republican attempts to exploit frustrations while the Democratic Party addresses those frustrations with real solutions. That was sort of his message about the Republican attack on schools. And then I think even, the teachers unions, Randy Weigarten said, like, if the NFL could figure out how to do this in terms of testing and the protocols, then we should be able to do it too. My members want it. They just want to be safe. Right. Which I think is sort of the right side to be on here.
Yeah. I just don't get why vaccines aren't at least available to every single teacher. I mean, in 2018, that school year, there were 3.5 million full and part-time public school teachers in the United States. That's not that many. I mean, I'm not saying they all could get vaccinated right now, but they all should have the vaccine available to them right now. If we're saying that this is absolutely critical and that we need them vaccinated to reopen schools, then we should vaccinate them. In the same way we've decided that the dermatologist's office is absolutely critical, and therefore all of them should be vaccinated so that office can be open safely. In the same way, the dentist, everyone in a dentist's office is vaccinated because dental care is critical. Like, we just need to prioritize education in the same way that we have healthcare. I think that seems entirely appropriate.
Totally agree. Last story for today. The Wall Street Journal reported last week that federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York are investigating how Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration handled the pandemic in the state's nursing home after New York Attorney General Letitia James released a report that said the state's Department of Health published data that undercounted the number of COVID-related nursing home deaths by as much as 50%. This comes on top of the criticism Cuomo has received for a March health department directive that said nursing homes couldn't refuse to admit a resident who came back from hospitalization and had still tested positive for COVID-19. Lovett, what is the Cuomo administration's side of the story here? And how well do you think it holds up?
Seems like their defense is twofold. On the communications front, they're saying they never failed to communicate any deaths, but that they were just referring to people who died in hospitals versus people who died in nursing homes, and that they were worried about Trump misinformation, misusing their data. And then on the actual outcomes of this, in terms of the nursing home deaths that took place in New York, I don't know what their explanation is other than they were moving quickly to make a bunch of very difficult decisions in an unprecedented pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, Tommy, it seems like, what the Cuomo administration says, okay, well, on the decision to, tell nursing homes that they have to admit patients, even if they're COVID positive, back from the hospital, they say, okay, well, that was the CDC guidance at the time. Other states like Florida did it as well. You can argue about the merits of that decision, but it does seem like withholding data about nursing home deaths and then trying to not count them as deaths just because the person died in the hospital, even though they were originated at a nursing home. And so you don't count it as a nursing home death just because the place that the person actually died was in the hospital and not the nursing home. Seems pretty bad to withhold that data.
Yeah, I mean, this does seem very bad. So what in terms of disclosing the data to the legislature, this Cuomo aide who was recorded on a conference call talking about this issue said that basically they got an inquiry from the legislature about nursing home data, and then they got one from the Department of Justice, and they decided to prioritize responding to the inquiry from the Department of Justice first. And then they also argued that the data sets they had were inconsistent. They took a while to clean up, et cetera. I mean, I do think that any criticism of New York's handling of COVID does have to be viewed in the context of them getting hit first, getting hit the hardest. It laid bare just how unprepared the entire country was to manage COVID. Because if you look at Tish James's report on nursing home deaths, it talks about the lack of PPE and how that put residents at risk. It talks about the lack of testing and screening and how there wasn't enough training for staff, right? And it found that bad nursing homes had more fatalities, like all things you would expect. All that said, I can't understand any excuse to withhold this data, to screw around with numbers this way. I mean, it seems completely inexcusable. It's good that the Tish James, the Attorney General's office, has put out a report despite also being a Democrat, right? There's no cover up by the party here. There's just something weird happened in Cuomo's office. So we're getting to the bottom of what happened, but it looked extremely bad.
Yeah, and so there's sort of three parts to this story. There's the original directive about nursing homes, and you can debate that policy choice that was CDC guidance at the time. Then there's the sort of misreporting, underreporting of the data, the withholding of the data from the DOJ and from the public and from the state legislature when they asked for it. And then the third part is, Assemblyman Ron Kim in the New York State Legislature told the New York Post that the Cuomo administration needs to show contrition to the public and the families of people who died in nursing homes. He said that to the Post. In response to those comments, Kim says that Cuomo called him and threatened to destroy him. Do you think that episode will be included in the paperback version of Cuomo's American Crisis: Leadership Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic?
Now with an expanded epilogue, it's I wonder what in an unprecedented pandemic, there will be There will be mistakes. There will be mistakes that look avoidable in hindsight. There's a lot of things they got right. There were going to be a lot of things they got wrong. We were learning about this virus in real time. But I do think that this moment is sort of an acute, like, Cuomo has had a reputation for a long time of being a bully, of being vindictive, of being, a bare knuckles fighter, whatever would be the euphemism that would be in a report. He also then set himself up as a hero in this crisis, as a leader in this crisis. He wrote a book about it. And the combination of this scandal and the scandal exposing some of his bullying tactics in the past, on top of him, I think, getting over his skis and deciding to declare victory over the pandemic in the middle of the pandemic, it looks very, very bad. It just all comes together to look extremely foolish.
Yeah, I mean, to Tommy's point, like, there are some, because the federal response was so bad and because New York was hit first and hit so hard, you can't really completely fault the state's leaders, and Cuomo included, for how bad things were. At the same time, you can't try to take all this praise and like write a book about leadership when you know that things haven't gone perfectly, and that, some of the reason that that things got better in New York is because the wave hit so hard and so early, right? Like, it's like, if you don't want all the blame, you also can't try to take all the credit.
Yeah, I also will say too, like, this is true of Gavin Newsom in California as well, in that I do, like, that does not detract from I think the important role these governors played in being more honest communicators about the seriousness of the pandemic, being about rejecting the downplaying of the pandemic that Trump was putting forward through the entire time he was in office during the pandemic. And I do think that was important, and I do think that played a role in this image that I think has been undermined, to say the least, by what's come out in the last few days about the nursing home deaths.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a lesson that so far the Biden administration is heeding, which is, like, in a pandemic, like, there's going to be bad news, there's going to be failures at times. You just got to be honest, and you got to communicate with people constantly, and you got to make sure that communication is honest. And then when you make a mistake, you've got to own up to the mistake, right?
Well, and that's the irony here, right? Because, like, New York got hit hard and hit early, and the fatalities were awful and the situation was bad. But what Cuomo got credit for was holding these daily televised press conferences where it seemed like he was communicating rationally and clearly and in a way that was a stark contrast to Trump. And then if you go on and withhold very important data sets and act like, it doesn't really matter that you did so because, a death is a death, you undercut your entire argument for why your leadership was good. And you do so in a way where you look pretty callous. So yeah, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Before we go, this was obviously a very serious story, but it has led to some reporting about Cuomo's bullying tactics. And there was one anecdote that that did make me laugh. And in this difficult time, it's important. Apparently there was some kind of a list for people who don't get yelled at. And this was in the Times piece. State Senator Liz Krueger, a Democrat from Upper Manhattan who holds sway in the legislature, etc., never been yelled at by the governor for a reason. She said, Joseph Percoco, a former aide, said she was on the do not yell at list. I responded, you people have such a list? He said, it's very small. Mr. Percoco is in federal prison and could not be reached for comment.
Yeah, a do not yell at list is so good.
I just like the little touch of they couldn't get him because he's in prison. All right, that's all I had.
I mean, you talk to people who've worked for him for years. Like, yeah, that's the reputation he has. He's an asshole. like people say that all the time. It's not great. Check out What a Day's Making Black History episode from Friday. The team put together a fantastic montage of Black men and women who just became the first in a variety of fields and what it means to them. There are more of these coming out over the course of Black History Month, so subscribe to What a Day and check it out.